You're listening to the Climate Dispatch podcast, presented by Sierra Club Angeles Chapter and Stranded Astronaut Productions. Available everywhere you listen to podcasts, we cover the stories of the climate crisis, from celebrating the wins to breaking down our fears, all while sharing collective hopes for the future. I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and this week we're talking about the human and environmental harms of transportation, LA's complicated relationship to transit, and how we can build cities for people instead of cars. Traffic jams, complex and crisscrossed highways, and smoggy days might be some of the worst things that come to mind when thinking of transportation within the city of Los Angeles. Though it wasn't always like this. There was a time where LA was known for its rail systems, and the skyline wasn't underpinned by overpasses and freeway traffic. Transportation and urban planning are inextricably linked. Where transit systems build stations, roads, and pathways define population centers and cultural hubs. How our city is built and grows is in reaction to these systems, or to their removal. All of this impacts where we might live, how we get to work, or how we access basic amenities like the grocery store. The decisions we make on a daily basis are impacted by this interconnected web. Here to talk through the process behind building a city and how land use and transit behavior might shape it is Brian Taylor, professor of urban planning and public policy in the Institute of Transportation Studies at UCLA.
We think about how cities develop. They often develop around whatever was the primary means of getting around at the time of their growth. So much older cities from around the world, when the main way people were getting around was on foot, are very compact, very kind of crowded together, small streets, lots of intersections. But as we started to move out and use public transit, the city started to move out as well and grow. Rail transit often caused cities to develop in sort of a starfish pattern. And then as the automobile became the dominant mode, you saw more sort of sprawling, lower density development. So when you look at a city like New York or San Francisco or Chicago or Los Angeles, what you see are sort of like rings in a tree. During wet years, you have a big ring, and it might be that a big share of the development occurred at one stage in their transportation evolution. So for Los Angeles, a great deal of the development occurred in what we call the streetcar era, when the main way that people got around was this starfish development of these streetcar lines that spread across the region. And then, of course, it grew into the enormous city that it is today, based mostly on getting around in automobiles. So the amount of the city that's the walking city is relatively small.
Los Angeles wasn't always filled with spider webs of concrete highways. In fact, the iconic Pacific Electric Railway Company's red cars once dominated our urban transit ecosystem, connecting the city centers of Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Orange, and Riverside counties. At the time, in the early 1900s, it was the largest electric railway system in the world. But as time moved on and the city expanded into a dense urban area, car sales soared alongside Los Angeles' fast urban development, effectively shuttering the city's privately owned streetcar service and leaning the city towards a car-centric design.
Compare that to Boston or New York or San Francisco, where a much larger share of the city developed during that walking era and then the public transit era, and not so much during the automobile era. So if you go to Boston, the outlying area doesn't look that different than the outlying area of Los Angeles or Dallas or any other city, but the central city looks very different. So when we often see those differences, it's really about when the city grew. Los Angeles really is a mega city. It has a population of just under 19 million people. And so in North America, there's only two other metro areas that are kind of close to its size, and that's Mexico City and New York. It's a lot of land that's easily developed right on the ocean. So it's constrained by the ocean on one side, the mountains on the other. And now we've hit those geographic limits, and that's why you see spillover development into Lancaster and Palmdale or into Victorville and out through the Inland Empire. But it's now kind of constrained in its development. And the big challenge is, does it now grow more dense over time and become more of a transit pedestrian-oriented city, or does it just continue to try and spread out into the desert and other areas?
LA County isn't actually that behind on transit solutions. LA County Metro operates the third largest transportation system in the entire United States. But its unique geographical location, as Brian mentions, and spread out density can make it difficult to navigate on the urban planning side.
Well, Los Angeles is indeed a sprawling area. It doesn't always fit its image that we have from movies and other things. It is auto-oriented, but actually less so than most metropolitan areas in the US, not more so. But it's actually the most densely developed urbanized area in the United States. It's more densely developed urbanized area than New York. If someone's been to New York, they say, well, how could that possibly be the case? I've been in Manhattan. I've seen the towering buildings and all of the walking and transit use. But it happens that while the center parts of New York are much more densely developed than the center parts of Los Angeles, the suburbs of New York are actually much lower density and more sprawling than the suburbs of Los Angeles. So what that means is that we have actually kind of a medium level of density, and that's really the explanation for why we have so much congestion in Los Angeles. We're not congested because we drive more than people do in other cities. We're congested because we're actually moderately more dense, which means there's more people making more auto trips relatively close together. And so if there's a sweet spot, we're kind of in the sour spot. We're a little too dense to be able to get around really smoothly where most people are driving, but we're not quite dense enough to make it really feasible to make most trips by public transit or by foot.
Over the last few decades, Los Angeles has continuously increased its metro rail system and promises new expansions ahead of the 2028 Olympics. But can these expansions help create a human-scale city, one that's built for and accessible to pedestrians over cars?
One of the big dilemmas going forward in the planning of Los Angeles is going to be whether we decide that we're going to urbanize, that Los Angeles will start to look more like San Francisco or Chicago, and that we'll build a lot more housing near the center, that will create more environments that actually make it tougher to drive and easier to walk, bike, and ride transit. There's a lot of pushback on that. We are building transit, as you noted at the outset, and we're investing a lot in that transit. We're making a lot of public improvements in public transit, but you need an environment that's congruent with public transit to make it work.
I'm interested if you've seen within these different neighborhoods or even cities inside of LA County, if there is a difference in behavior or even pushback. If you're seeing more in the suburban areas, that's where a lot of the pushback to urbanization is coming from versus like where I live in Koreatown, Central LA, or downtown LA.
Well, there's a few things to understand here is that a lot of the transportation planning and investment is handled by currently the federal government. We'll see what happens in the next few months, but by the state and by these things that exist that only really planners seem to know a lot about, called metropolitan planning organizations. Most development is handled by local governments. So by local governments, I mean the city of LA, the city of Long Beach, the city of Culver City, the city of West Hollywood. They make the bottom line decisions about what development goes where, what scale it can be at, and how much neighborhoods have control in pushing back on new development. I hate to complicate things, but depending on what city you're in and what the local political zeitgeist is, there's very different attitudes. There's things we want to protect these neighborhoods. They're mostly single-family housing. We want to keep it that way. We don't want apartments or condos in our neighborhood. We want to push that out. And there's a lot of tension in the region about what the regional housing needs are and how we assess that and how we assign where new development is going to occur. But even with all of the development that's been going on, we're still way behind the number of housing units we need to bring affordability down. And so because of that, the region is losing people who find it increasingly difficult to afford and see home ownership or condo ownership still so far off they'll never get there. So that's a big issue for the region. And of course, if people are staying in the region, they have to move farther out. It's a bigger environmental footprint. It's more travel, more traffic, more congestion, and harder to serve with public transit because it's not development, it's congruent with transit. Transit works really well when you can walk out of your apartment or home and a few steps to a bus stop or a train station and travel to a destination be able to change easily and move on. You go to a place like Tokyo, Mexico City, London, or even New York, that's easy to do. When it's easy to do that, people don't have to drive for every trip. And if it's in the neighborhood, they don't have to drive a long way for every trip. And both of those lower the environmental footprint of cities significantly.
I want to talk a little bit about the impact with greenhouse gas emissions, transportation, which it contributes 29% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the US, is a major contributor to climate change. But those pollutants are also unhealthy for the communities that are around them. And this is, more specifically talking about commercial vehicles and that kind of goods and services transport that we see at the ports or on highways. So when we're looking at that, where are the solutions there? Where are clean vehicles or other solutions kind of fitting into how we address that larger issue?
We have to think about emissions from vehicles as having at least 3 spatial scales. We have very localized emissions that really have nothing to do with greenhouse gas emissions. And those are historically carbon monoxide and what we call fine particulate matter. More and more research has shown that to be a significant public health threat. Emphysema, low birth weights, asthma are all affected by that. And so one of the big equity issues we have is that those who live and work near major transportation facilities alongside freeways or major boulevards or arterials around things like the ports or rail yards tend to be exposed to fine particulate matter much more than people farther away. People will often be looking for housing that they can afford, and being adjacent to a major transportation facility pushes rents down. You'll tend to have more people of color, more immigrants, more low-income households living adjacent to these facilities and exposed to the public health effects of that. Then the next spatial scale is at more of a regional scale. So you can think of the LA basin, for example, or the San Francisco Bay Area. And that's usually hydrocarbons and oxides of nitrogen that combine in the atmosphere and form ozone or smog. And that also has public health consequences, but it tends to form at kind of a regional level so that engines that are releasing emissions in Santa Monica will often be blown to the Inland Empire where they create ozone. And then greenhouse gas emissions like CO2 aren't necessarily poisonous to people, but what they do, of course, is they rise in the atmosphere and cause the planet to warm. And that's a planetary scale. And it doesn't matter whether it's released in Xi'an, China, or in Johannesburg, South Africa, or in Los Angeles, it all contributes to the warming of the climate. And so that's an enormous collective action problem, meaning that we all over the planet, you may do a lot in your city to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but your contributions to the environment are global. Your city doesn't become less subject to climate change because of that. So there's a whole range of public health effects. Climate change is a huge part of that, but we need to think about how we manage all of those things to try and create healthy communities, healthy regions, and then a healthy planet.
So how does a neighborhood end up in the shadow of a freeway? As transit and transportation solutions cater to evolving populations, many communities get sidelined in favor of wealthier areas. These decisions don't just affect access to transit, they create environmental justice dilemmas. Transportation is the #1 source of climate pollution in the state of California, and the direct impacts of air pollution and health hazards often disproportionately impact BIPOC and lower-income communities. The Inland Empire, comprised of LA's neighboring cities, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Ontario, experiences some of the worst air quality in the entire country, driven primarily by traffic congestion and commercial transportation pollution. There is a cleaner future possible, however, with recent policies enacting clean vehicle regulations, slow but sure consumer behavior changes, and impactful advocacy work like the Sierra Club Clean Transportation for All campaign. Everyone deserves access to clean, healthy air, and curbing transportation emissions must be an integral part of the solution to climate change. But what does the road to cleaner air look like, especially in areas designed for cars instead of communities? And how can campaigns elevate the voices of the communities most impacted?
A lot of people get to have jobs where they get to clock in and clock out, and then go about their business. But I clock in and clock out, and I still breathe the same air in this community.
That's Jennifer Cardenas, a campaign organizer for the Sierra Club Clean Transportation for All campaign, who works within her own community to combat air pollution. I sat down with Jennifer and Yassi Kavezade, Associate Director of Policy and Campaigns at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, to discuss how transportation infrastructure impacts us.
I'm a frontline community member, first of all. And for me, it was really understanding how these impacts were not just affecting me and my family, but my neighbors, my friends, and the community around me. So for me, what inspired me to continue on this journey or understand this journey better was really, how can I fight for the people around me to have just access to clean air?
Like Jennifer, this organizing work was a personal call to action for Yassi.
When I moved to the Inland Empire, I saw the disparity in urban planning differences of communities that are near the coast in Los Angeles or Orange County and how it differed in inland communities. I saw industrial gentrification happening where people were losing their homes and getting warehouses built right next door to schools, parks. And that really got me curious about the intersectionalities of health, workforce, environmental racism, environmental justice, all these things that were theories that I was actually living alongside with.
Yassi and Jennifer met as organizers for Sierra Club's Clean Transportation for All campaign, a campaign focused on reducing environmental and public health harms from commercial transportation, like regulating warehouses and ports that are located near homes.
When people think transportation, they do always think like EV, or they just think electric cars. But one of the things that now we're focusing on is we're looking into the port ISR. How do we create an indirect source rule for the ports? Because we're seeing the same impacts for the communities adjacent to these ports, to the workers. So people that work in this area are also being impacted. And these indirect source rules could be life-changing, just because if we go into clean equipment, the people that work there, the people adjacent to them will also have cleaner air. So we've been fighting this right now, but it's been a battle that has been going on for almost 20 years in California.
Transportation expands past commutes and public transit use to commercial transportation like cargo ships or trucks. The constant burning of fuels at ports, warehouses, and other commercial transportation hubs releases toxic exhaust and cancer-causing substances into nearby neighborhoods. A major part of the Clean Transportation for All campaign has been rallying for the implementation of the Indirect Source Rule, or ISR, to regulate this public health hazard. The rule requires warehouses, rail yards, and ports within the South Coast Air Quality Management District, an area that represents a third of California's population, to track their air pollutants and offset them. This is a major step towards reducing the public health impacts of these industries and protecting nearby communities.
A lot of communities, they're experiencing it. They might not have the language or know exactly that it's like, these particles, PM 2.5, that are what's impacting their kidneys, their lungs, but they're living it. And they know that it's happening to them. They know that the air quality is bad. You can see it. The thing is that we don't have a lot of advocates on the other side that are doing the work, like these local environmental justice communities that basically are created because they know it's happening.
Commercial transportation pollution is not only a leading driver of the climate crisis, it's also another marker of environmental racism. These ports are often located in communities that are predominantly made up of BIPOC and immigrant populations. Across the US, 39 million people live in communities surrounding ports, and research has shown that this proximity leads to community-wide health problems and shorter lifespans. The issue expands past the environmental injustices of air pollution and public health to the intersectionality of housing rights, redlining, and urban planning that impacts daily life.
When we look at cities in the Inland Empire, cities have literally rezoned areas to now be industrial, light industrial, that once were housing, right? So then we're seeing like this domino effect of us needing housing and people advocating for being able to afford a home, while their representatives have changed the dynamics of these cities. And now all of these communities not only face the worst ozone in the country, and then on top of that, when we think of like transportation, who waits for a bus? Low-income communities, communities of color. But if there's idling trucks in your neighborhood, because there's already warehouses in your neighborhood, these idling trucks are now creating that same pollution that you're breathing in for waiting for the bus, because that's what's affordable. And sometimes if we don't have transportation that's reliable, you're trying to go into work 1 or 2 hours before just to get to work on time. And now you're in the hot sun waiting to get on public transportation to get to work because you need to afford the medicine, or you need to afford housing, you need to afford food on the table, right? So we're seeing like all of these impacts all at once happening, and they're all the things that we fight for.
True environmental justice must include authentic organizing and voices that arise and guide from within the affected communities. The needs of a homeowner with an EV will not necessarily encompass the needs of a renter who takes the bus, and proposed solutions won't align unless they originate locally.
Originally in the Inland Empire, we were tasked to put solar on homes, and we had to push back in the organization and be like, hey, people are struggling to breathe. People have asthma. People are getting, rolled over by the warehousing industry. People are not seeing good jobs in their communities. So we had to push back and create an authentic narrative.
I think as organizers, one of the good things that we practice is we connect to community leaders. We connect to organizations already doing the work. And then we ask them, we meet them where they're at. How can we give you more information on the things that your community is already facing when we think about health impacts, asthma rates? How can we give you more resources and provide the information needed to really advocate for your community?
Quality organizing needs community engagement and input, and also just a connection. I think leveraging the Sierra Club's historical resources and campaigns to do an authentic place-based work took a lot of time. It took time even before I was involved in the organization, and people really pushing the Sierra Club to go through a non-traditional mindset of distributed organizing, which looks at a big issue like coal plants or power plants, but really transforming that into a local story and a local issue.
Alongside regulating commercial transportation pollution, the Clean Transportation for All campaign is focused on increasing access to equitable public transit. This means making it easier to move around in an environmentally friendly way with better transit and pedestrian infrastructure, while implementing clean transportation policies that won't leave underserved communities behind.
At the end of the day, at the heart of the campaign is everyone deserves to be able to move. Everyone deserves the right to breathe clean air. Everyone deserves the right to have access to transportation. So that's at the core of our campaign. And there are different decision makers and agencies across the country or statewide or regionally or citywide that are in charge of deciding where infrastructure, where priorities, and where these different modalities grow or planned with the environment and with issues like climate change that are upon us. And a lot of our goals are around making sure that we have a systemic change by 2045. 2045 is kind of like that big marker where even the state of California has a 100% clean energy goal. We want to see a lot of these goals around mode shift, which means, instead of taking your car that uses gasoline, maybe you take the bus, or maybe you take a bike, or maybe you drive an electric vehicle. We want to see these types of mode shifting in our rules.
As much as the polluters have always put so much money into ensuring that they can get their way, community has always shown up first, and they have been such a powerful voice in all the movements that have happened here in the IE and Southern California.
Bringing in the powerful voices of community members requires greater access to education around urban planning as a concept and the direct impacts that it has on communities. When looking at urban planning through a lens of transit access and housing equity, we need to think about how we can create an accessible system of transit that doesn't extract the quality of life from one group to benefit another. Brian tells me that part of this process is reframing how we view urban planning and transit by updating outdated terms, averting the use of heavy acronyms, and reflecting on why people move within an area.
One of the faults I have with planning is that we often use a lot of technical term, and it really makes the whole field, which is about people's lives and how we organize them in space, really inaccessible to the typical person. How do we help people get around? How do we help them ride transit, get around in their car, get around in any way possible, how we can help them move around? And really, it's not the end, it's the means. The criticism is we've been so focused on trying to make it easy for people to get around. They're driving a lot more, but they're not necessarily getting a better quality of life out of all that driving. So there has been a movement that really started with a professor here at UCLA back in the 70s who started pushing the idea of access rather than mobility. It's really taken off really in the late 90s and since then, which is that we don't think about people moving around. We think about people getting to desired destinations. How can we make it easier for people to access what they need for a high quality of life? Can they get to the groceries they want? Can they get to recreation? Can they see friends? Can they get to work? Can they reach those things in ways that aren't so environmentally and economically wasteful? And so a lot of that is trying to think about things. There's a term like the 20-minute city or the 15-minute city, where we try and create neighborhoods and communities where lots of your needed destinations are nearby. And it's easy to walk or bike, or even if you do drive, it's a very short trip.
Ryan mentions the 15-minute city, an urban planning concept that designs cities in a way so that basic amenities like grocery stores, work, school, and recreational activities are all within a 15-minute walk, bike, or public transit ride. Miracle Mile, a popular retail strip in the center of Los Angeles, was specifically designed for car traffic, or at automotive scale, with its storefront design best suited to be viewed at 30 miles per hour. In contrast, the 15-minute city puts pedestrians first, with a human-scale design, creating walkable communities and promoting healthier, happier, and more sustainable lives. How do you think we can better design these cities to feel more human scale, to be more pleasant for our daily walks, bikes, and commutes to work or to the grocery store?
I really think that we could be doing a lot more to improving walking environments, even if people are still driving around a lot. And one of the complaints is we haven't paid enough attention to creating those quality walking environments in places like Los Angeles. So part of it is a built environment part. Can we think about how to structure environments so that they are safe and convenient places to walk? So that brings the second thing is there's an idea that really has come out over the last 15 years or so, maybe 20 years, called complete streets, where the argument is that streets really served multiple functions a century ago. There were commercial activities, people walked, there was horse-drawn carriages, there were streetcars, there were people getting around by all means. In some cases, they were quite chaotic. And in a sense, to try and organize these spaces for safety, over time, we gradually came to privilege automobile travel more and more. Sidewalks got narrower, more lanes were added, speeds went up. So it wasn't necessarily the built environment that wasn't congruent to walking, for example, or biking. It was that gradually we privileged automobile travel more and more and more. So one of the things that we have is a model where the cost that society bears for driving, providing those roads, providing that parking, is paid for by everyone else but not drivers. If we have to depend on people's desire to have a cleaner planet and to go against what works best for them, we're never going to make it to the end. So what we want to do is create environments where people's logical decisions are actually best for society, best for the planet.
There isn't just one solution to transportation emissions and transit access within Los Angeles and globally. The future could be paved with clean air policies that encourage electric vehicles and regulate commercial fleets, better infrastructure for walking and biking, more affordable housing infrastructure built near existing transit hubs, and expanded transit systems that make your life more convenient with a metro station just steps outside your home. Whether it be through new policies, behavior change, or urban planning, the solutions must be multifaceted, sustainable, and sourced from the community that they serve. In an area that sometimes feels built for cars, regulating commercial transportation in industrial zones while making public transit convenient, accessible, and even enjoyable can help us create cleaner, more resilient, equitable, human-scale cities, while reducing emissions that are harming our shared planet.
Hi, it's Megan from the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, here with your weekly call to action. And this week we've got 2 very important actions you can take today. The Angeles chapter is currently mobilizing to keep the air we breathe clean, both inside and outside. We are fighting to phase out fossil fuel use in our homes and transition to green energy by electrifying our buildings. Join the Voices for Clean Air by signing our petition at sc.org/cleanair, and join our rally for clean air on June 6th by signing up at sc.org/cleanairrally. Again, the petition is sc.org/cleanair, and the rally sign up is at sc.org/cleanairrally. We hope to see you on the front line.
Thanks for listening to the Climate Dispatch podcast. I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and now supplying ethereal sounds to wherever you're listening from is Holy Matter with the song Eve's Hollywood.
The vampires and their women grow in their gardens. They live and they die in LA. Singing and they're swimming in dirty white linens. The seasons are strangers. The clouds barely sigh in LA. Born beautiful yesterday. Flowers bloom brighter in the
The Climate Dispatch is a production of Stranded Astronaut and the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, produced by myself, Tay Jeanette, Meg Pruce, and Megan Spatz. Audio engineering and editing by Maxfield Biggs, original theme music and score by Phil Hamilton, and graphics by Cirrus Marlo Sama.